But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Let me tell you about my great God. Hey guys, Pastor Tim here. Hope you're ready to get your day started off in God's Word. We are in Genesis chapter 12, the beginning of this great biblical figure, this great man of faith that we see throughout the Bible that should be very familiar to many of you guys, especially if you've grown up in church, and that is Abraham, or as we know him in this chapter, Abram. At the very beginning of this chapter, in chapter 12, we see God's covenant with Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. And it's pretty much the promise God makes to him that he will give him a son. And not only that, he will give him a great name and allow him to be the father of a great nation, and that all nations on the earth will be blessed through him. All right, and we know that to be the continuation of the promise God made to Adam and Eve back in chapter 3, meaning that the Messiah will come through Abraham's seed, eventually, as we know, in the New Testament. All right, because remember, Abraham's going to be the father of the nation of Israel, and Jesus Christ would come through the nation of Israel one day into the world. And so this is a great promise that God made into Abraham, this covenant he made, and we know God keeps his promises, but from a human point of view, this was definitely a big pill to swallow, because Abraham and Sarah already at this point were already way past the age of childbearing, and they have not had a child as of yet. So from a human point of view, it seemed impossible, but obviously we know with God, all things are possible. I believe the correct numbers are, at this time, Abraham was about 75 years old, and Sarai was about 65 at this time. And so the chapter goes on, we kind of discover that Abraham, he's a very wealthy guy. He has a great amount of people that works for him, follows him. He even takes his nephew Lot along with him, and we'll see that will become a hindrance in the future as well. But every place that Abraham went, to Bethel and so forth, he would always set up his tent and he would set up his altar. All right, and this was a great picture of what it means to live the Christian life. The tent kind of represents that, Abraham was a pilgrim. He was trusting God each and every day to lead him where he needed to go, and he would dwell where God led him to. All right, he would pitch his tent wherever God led him to go. And it's much like how we live in this world today. As a child of God, this world is not our final home. We're just, as the song goes, we're just a passing through. All right, and so we're trusting God. We are to follow God each and every day of our lives, pitching our tent wherever he leads us, and serving and glorifying him wherever he tells us to go, or wherever he leads us to go. And not only that, he also sets up an altar wherever he went, just kind of signifying him continually worshiping God. And we see when he starts to falter in his faith and disobey God, we see in his life that it always happens when he abandons the tent and the altar. For example, at the end of this chapter, when the famine comes through, instead of trusting God to protect him and provide for him in the land God led him to, the land of Canaan, he decides to leave that land, leave behind the tent and the altar, and he goes to Egypt. Egypt is a picture of the world oftentimes throughout the Bible, and that pictures to us that instead of trusting in God and where God led him, Abraham chose rather to trust in the world to protect him and provide for him during this famine. All right, and obviously today, if we follow that same method, it's not going to lead to very good results for us either, just as it doesn't lead to good things for Abraham. Because when he goes to Egypt, as we come to find out, even at the age of 65 as an older woman, Sarah was still a very beautiful woman. All right, and Abraham was so scared that the Pharaoh and other rich, wealthy men would be so attracted to her that they would kill him, knowing that he was her husband, so that they could take her to be part of their family, be their wife as well. So Abraham tells Sarah, hey, if anyone asks, tell them you're my sister, which is a half-truth. All right, Abraham and Sarah were at this time were half siblings. All right, but all because it's a half-truth means it's also not a complete truth, which means it's a lie. It was still a sin for Abraham to propose this scheme. And remember the saying, guys, scheming is not believing. And as it goes on through the chapter, Pharaoh sees Sarai, and of course he sees that she's very attractive and decides, you know what, I'm going to take her unto myself. He does that, and he actually treats Abraham well, thinking he's just her brother. But God, obviously, he punishes Pharaoh for this. He plagues him, And Pharaoh gets mad at Abraham for this, and it kind of just shows that because of his unbelief, Abraham ended up having a very poor testimony in front of Pharaoh and in front of all these unbelievers in Egypt. It's a very sad thing to happen, but it can happen in our lives as well when we choose rather to follow and trust the world than to follow and trust God. It affects our testimony. So that kind of sums up the chapter. And as you could tell, as I was talking through it, there's probably a lot of different things you guys could get out of this chapter as your main thing. And that's fine. You could circle a lot of them, write all those things down. But for me personally, what I think is really interesting, or that really stuck out to me today in reading this chapter, because if I read it another time, something else might stick out to me. That is the fact that God promised to make Abraham not just a great nation, but give him a great name. And he's someone that we still talk about today in the Bible, and not just even in Christian circles. And I find it kind of funny and ironic that in the last chapter, the people that were at the Tower of Babel did not trust God, did not obey God, and were seeking to make of them a great name and build this giant tower. And God dispersed them. He confounded their language. We don't know who any of those people are. Yet Abraham, because by faith he trusted God and followed God wherever he led him, God made of him a great name that thousands of years later we are still talking about and teaching other people about today. All right, it just goes forward to show that it pays more to trust and follow God than it does to trust and follow this world. That's all I got for today, guys. Tell somebody about your great God and what you got out of his word today. Stay safe, stay healthy. God bless.